Oh, this is gonna be crazy. That was great. Alright, hello everyone and welcome today to another episode of SpraynPray1000's Verdict. I am SpraynPray1000 and today we are going to talk about a game that was extremely, very highly anticipated. A game that I basically had to put all other projects I was doing on hold in order to beat, now that my schedule's busier and everything. Today we're going to talk about, and this just disconnected for some weird reason. Today we're going to talk about Dark Souls 2, sequel to 2011's, I wouldn't say sleeper hit, but what do you call it? Like surprise hit, Dark Souls. Now, Dark Souls 2 is a third-person action-adventure game. It's a fantasy game, medieval kind of setting. I wouldn't call it dark fantasy, but although it is kind of, dreary and gloom, full of gloom. But what is Dark Souls? Dark Souls, and just the Souls series in general, which now comprises, I believe, 3 games, is known for its high difficulty. The fact that you as the player, you're not some invincible tank. In fact, it's very easy for you to all of a sudden just get overwhelmed by the opposition, may potentially even die. Now, the main sort of thing that Dark Souls is known for is when you die, what happens is when your HP gets depleted to 0, your character dies. What happens then is it's not a game over. Rather, the game continues from your last checkpoint. In this game, they're called bonfires. They're places where you sit at. You regain your HP and spell uses. And what happens is you lose all your souls, and the only way to get these souls back is by returning to the spot where you died, or depending on if you fell from a cliff or something. Obviously they put it on top of the cliff so that way you don't have to fall down, what I mean? Like they put it in the last safe place that you were at before you died. And if you die again before getting those souls back, you lose them. They're gone, and your new death spot now contains all the souls you got prior to your death. So that's why the Dark Souls series is known for, high difficulty. The fact that death, it means something rather than just, I'll start again from a checkpoint. No, death in this game means a lot. And it could potentially screw you over. You could lose a lot of souls. You could lose none. This game is best approached with care, patience, understanding how the game works. And I'll say the same thing that I said for Dark Souls 1. Your first experience with a Souls game, like the first time you sit down and play one of these games, assuming you haven't read like 500 guides on how to play the game, your first experience with a Dark Souls game will beat your ass. It will be very hard. It will be very brutal, because you have to get used to it. Once you're used to it, the game it's really fun. Once you understand how you can use the game mechanics to your advantage and whatnot, the game becomes really enjoyable, really unique experience. But until then, it's going to be pretty difficult for someone who's never played a Souls game to suddenly adjust to it. So I can understand that. So that's the initial thing. So now, what are these souls used for? In Dark Souls, the way that you level up, specifically in this game, is you talk to someone and you offer them souls, and they reinforce your stats. Now, in this game, stats aren't. I'd like to say stats are more of a requirement meters than necessity. And that is, it's not like you can't go to a high-level area and do well. Rather, the fact that you need a certain amount of points in a stat in order to wield a weapon that'll let you effectively fight enemies or wield certain armor. Because even towards the end of the game, early enemies can do potential amounts of damage that are pretty dangerous to you. So really, it's all about tactics, how you approach these enemies in this real-time environment. And I'll say this right now, I like that about Dark Souls. I was really looking forward to Dark Souls 2 because I was really looking forward to, starting again, starting fresh in a new environment. where I could, instead of doing what I did with Dark Souls 1, which is start playing the game, on a loan, since I loaned it from a friend, then stop and then buy it myself, play it for 1 month, and then finally come back to it almost like 6 months later, which was very disjointed. It left me for, very fragmented in my knowledge of the game. It was nice to come sit down and play Dark Souls 2 pretty much, continuously for like a full month. And the game is a blast. The game is very enjoyable. The gameplay is just so in-depth. Okay, so let's start talking about the gameplay. I've already mentioned how the souls work. Souls are also currency. So you can buy items with souls. You can offer them to certain things. Now, just, if you played Dark Souls 1, you'll be familiar with some of the stuff I'm going to talk about. In this game, what you can do with your characters, you can design them however you want. And what happens is at the beginning of the game, you start off as human. You know what I mean? You're alive, you're a human. But upon your first death, you become undead. And what happens is every time when you're undead, you receive a penalty to your HP. And every time you die more and more and more, that penalty grows bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, there are maybe 1 or 2 items in the game that can help alleviate that sort of penalty. But if you don't do anything to stop it, and by doing something to stop it, I mean using an item called a human effigy, which will return you back to a human, your HP can be docked by as much as 50%, which is a lot. And that could create problems. So basically, the game gets harder and harder the more you die. Now, what I will say is I think this game is actually a bit easier than Dark Souls 1 if if you know how to play a Souls game. If you're familiar with it. Now, I can't speak much for PvP, player versus player action, because I'm not too big on that. But I can speak from just a single player's experience. This game, even just, whether or not you're doing PvP, PvE, this game has a lot to it. So the story is pretty long. I'd say it's about maybe 60 hours, although I did some grinding, so I couldn't tell you for certain how long it would be. So as of right now, I'd say for sure that the game is at least 50 to 60 hours long in your first playthrough, give or take. Once certain factors and whatnot, your skill level and whatnot. And on top of that, you got PvP. That kind of works similar to the last game, where you can only PvP within a certain range of your level. You have multiple gameplay mechanics, such as using spells. You have to buy a spell, attune it, and then use a catalyst in battle. There's also covenants, which are like these divine organizations you can pledge your character to. You can get special bonus items for that. And do a whole bunch of cool stuff with that. There's a couple of them throughout the game you can find. Some are catered towards PvP, some cater towards co-op playthrough, or helping other people. Others cater towards defending against PvP. Others are just for playing the game, story mode, PvE, or player versus environment. And the game is long. There's a lot of good stuff that happens in the game. You got parrying, you have backstabbing. So all the mechanics pretty much from Dark Souls 1 return is what I'm trying to say. So pretty much if you play Dark Souls 1, you'll hop right in. You'll feel right at home with this game. Story-wise, I think the game is pretty well done. Again, it's dark. It's unrelated from Dark Souls 1 for the most part. Although it kind of hints at being a far-off sequel for the most part. Although you can't. Again, it's left up to your interpretation, which is like a lot of Dark Souls stuff. It's left up to your interpretation, how you want to perceive it. And it's very interesting, this game, how the story, again, like Dark Souls 1, the story, they don't tell you specifically what to do. They sort of more give you hints and then turn you loose, at the beginning of the game. And I think, like Dark Souls 1, it kind of adds to the difficulty because you don't know where to go. You could be simply wasting your time in a high-level area. I know a lot of people who played Dark Souls 1 initially, they really were confused about where to go. I was confused myself on where to go, just simply because the game kind of, leaves you high and dry. They don't really tell you too much on where to go. Which is, while it's interesting, while it's, funny, and, and it can lead to some hilarious stuff, it can be frustrating at times, where you're like, come on, man, I just want to know where to go, because I'm wasting a lot of time, I'm wasting a lot of souls, especially in this game when dying is really penalized, In Dark Souls 1, humanity was only something you would use when you want to reinforce a bonfire, or, you know, if you wanted to do PvP or something. You know, it wasn't something that affected your in-game, you know, your main game playthrough for the most part, you know, being undead. The story pretty much revolves around you as the player character, being cursed by this sign on your shoulder, I believe it is, or on the back of your shoulder, and seeking for a way for you to alleviate yourself from this curse, having lost everything. And you end up in this place called Drangliek, and your goal is to find this something that will alleviate your curse while also searching for the king of Drangliek. And for the most part, I think the story, you know, it's very interesting. As I said, it's very disjointed. You know, a lot of the story comes from reading the item descriptions from the items that you pick up. So that's good. I think the story will be interesting. It's not the main purpose of the game, like, you know, other RPGs. Maybe you might say that the story plays a bigger role, but it's there and it's pretty rich for something that's kind of, you know, I wouldn't say holding your hand or sitting or standing next to you as you play the game, but something that's more like in your closet or something, you know, or behind you. It's different for that. So, what should I say now? I think I will talk about the soundtrack really quickly. The soundtrack in this game is very nice. I think the music really accompanies it. You know, it really adds to the atmosphere of the game. Again, some areas do not have any music. So the soundtrack, of course, is, you know, limited to maybe boss fights or, you know, menus or certain areas. But it's pretty nice for where it is. That's the whole point of a Souls game, I guess, to kind of leave you feeling, you know, alienated and alone. Because they don't always play music in every area. A lot of times it's just you running around in an area with a lot of enemies. Now, let's talk about some of the major changes to this game and some of the things I don't like. Some of the big changes to this game: enemies do not respawn anymore, okay? Enemies, well, let me rephrase that. You can kill enemies, similar to Dark Souls 1, and at a bonfire when you rest, enemies respawn. But after, I think, 10, 15 or so respawns, enemies will not respawn anymore. Meaning that, on the plus side, if you're trying to get to a boss and you're just finding it's too difficult for you and you just want to get to the boss, after a certain point of killing the monsters on the way to the boss, they'll stop respawning, which means you'll have nothing between you and, I don't know, maybe traps or something, but no enemies between you and the boss. On the other hand, if you're trying to grind, this could be very bad because after a certain point, you're gonna run out of areas to grind in. You know, monsters are gonna stop respawning, and then you'll have to make do with what you have. So, again, the carefulness has to come into effect, but for the most part, I don't think you'll have too much of a problem with that. As long as you play carefully and you don't die too often, you'll be fine. I already talked about how you progressively lose HP. Something I noticed on this game is that on the PlayStation 3, this game has a lower frame rate than Dark Souls 1. Now, if you remember, Dark Souls 1 had a pretty consistent frame rate. Now, I'm not saying, oh, it's not 60 frames. You know, I don't even, you know, but the fact that the frame rate drops at some points actually kind of hurts the game because you need to be able to see what enemies are doing, especially in a game where, you know, death is so easy, you know, to encounter and so easy to die. It kind of, you know, it's a hindrance. It's not as good when the frame rate suddenly drops, and Dark Souls 1 had a specific area notable for this. It was called Blight Town. Well, now, in this game, the frame rate drops seem to be more frequent, which is kind of weird in my opinion. I don't know how it ended up like that. Especially on the PlayStation 3. Now, from what I've seen, I played the 360 version of the game thanks to How Original. The 360 version of the game apparently does not have frame rate issues, but it has screen tearing and no VSync. So really, both versions of the console edition of this game kind of have some sort of graphical or, you know, visual issues. So I think that for the most part, it's worse on the PlayStation. But that it's really not that big of a deal. But that's what I've observed from playing the game. Now, that's kind of really one of the biggest complaints I have about this game. Really, this game, again, it is what it is. You know, it's either going to really appeal to you, or it's really going to, you know, turn you off, and you're going to play it for a little bit just for shock value, you know, just for, oh, this is a really hard game, and you're going to turn it down. So you pretty much know what you're going to get into in this game, and if you don't, I recommend at least, you know, looking into it, because this is one of the more interesting RPG experiences out there. I think that a lot of people are going to like what From Software has done in this game. There's definitely a lot of ways to customize your character. You know, there's different builds and whatnot. The one thing I don't understand is why Pyromancer is no longer a starting class. You know, as opposed to Dark Souls 1. Now Pyromancy is more of an all-around magic class. Speaking of that, there's also 4 different types of magic: Pyromancy, Miracles, Hexes, and Sorceries. Each one uses a different... Well, Sorceries rely on Intelligence as a stat, and Miracles rely on Faith. But other than that, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. It's pretty much cut and dry. And I think that this game it's really good. You know, I really like this game. I really enjoyed it. So, ultimately, what would I give Dark Souls 2? Yeah, just Dark Souls 2. What would I give this game as a rating? I'd say that, first of all, because, you know, I do this as well as numerical ratings, I say that if you're looking for a new Souls game, obviously you're going to buy this game. You're going to be sold on it right away. So I don't even need to appeal to the Souls people, because they know what they want. What would I say about this game, though? I'd say that if you're looking for an interesting RPG, something to liven it up, something different with, you know, complicated mechanics, you know, an intriguing story, a nice presentation, I think that you couldn't you couldn't really set your sights any better than Dark Souls, or, you know, the franchise in general, because there's just so much to get into, there's so much to do, and there's definitely replay value, you know, with playing with different characters and whatnot. There's just a great factor in this game. So I'll say that, you know, this game is definitely for people who want to push the limit, you know, definitely take it to a new level, and I think you can't go any better than Dark Souls in terms of an exotic RPG that's very different from the norm. So what would I give Dark Souls 2? I'd give it a 91 out of 100. You know, definitely a step up from the predecessor, although there are some issues. You know, it's minor stuff. And, you know, it's definitely... I can't wait to see what From Software does next, to be truthful. You know, I just enjoy the Souls games so much. And as I speak, I'm uploading the finale of my first playthrough. I will be doing a New Game Plus of this game, because I definitely want to see if anything changes, you know, along those lines. And I want to see how the difficulty gets ramped up. So... I think that's going to conclude this, unless I can remember anything, which I don't think I can. Definitely a lot of stuff to this game, so obviously, you know, there's way more stuff to be looking out for, you know, especially along the lines of PvP and other player interaction stuff. So, I'm SpraynPray1000's. I guess people came here first. You know what? That's the reason why I fucking hate this game sometimes. I hate this fucking franchise because of shit like that. Well, I think it's time to call it a night. Because that's just fucking... Really? None of you guys want to put boss ahead? You want to put all this other stuff, but you couldn't put fake door? I should have known. I should have known. I knew it. I should have known this game was going to do that. Well, the last thing I'll do for the night... I just got fucked, man. The game just boned me so badly.